Romany and Raq by G Bramwell Evens. Give me the clear blue sky over my head and the green turf beneath my feet, a winding road before me, and then to thinking. Chapter 7. Shearing Sheep. June. For the first time for many weeks, Raq and I walked on moist land. As the dog brushed through the long grass of the hedge bottoms, so they sprayed him with shining drops. How green the leaves appeared! Trees and hedges had had their faces washed free from dust, and the herbage, weary with the drought, was looking young again. Even the birds were beginning to sing. What a tragic time the nurseries have had! The relentless dryness had practically exterminated the insect life on which the parent birds depended for their youngsters' diet, and one by one a brood of 4 had dwindled to an emaciated one. Even the survivor, though he had managed to find his wings, yet found the earth too hard to probe with his amateurish diggings. Down in what once were marshes, the birds of the mire and swamp had found only hard-baked, cracked mud. Plovers, snipes, and their kin must have been bereaved of their fluffy mites, looking in vain for the rain that meant salvation. In the rivers, too, the mortality among the fish had been great. Now, however, the dog and I noticed that the birds had plucked up courage again. Even the thrush and blackbird, who usually store away their flutes when July approaches, were piping in the elms. The robin seemed to have lost some of his plaintiveness, and the wren sang a song which, for volume, made one think he must be the size of a storm-cock. As we neared the farm, we heard a big chorus of protesting, querulous bleatings. Scores of quavering questions fell from the throats of the lambs. We were early enough to catch Alan and Joe going into breakfast. This meal, as everyone knows, is the one which prepares the way for the later 10 o'clock. Neither I nor the dog were loath to follow them into the kitchen, where Hannah and Charlotte were busy with something which produced most appetizing odours. "And what's the row going on among the sheep?" I asked as we sat down to table. "Joe's been rounding 'em up," answered Alan. "We're going to do a bit of clipping." "Shingling," Joe interpolated with a wink. "We must keep up with the times." "Shearing," corrected his brother with a smile. And then Hannah brought in the bacon and conversation stopped for a few minutes. "I don't know how you manage it," I said, "but the flavour of your rashers is always the same. We get stuff in the town which tastes like fried tape. Yours, too, swims in the most succulent dip. Our town variety dries up like oak chips." "What goes into the pig comes out in the bacon," said Alan. "Good feeding brings its dividend, a good flavour." "And good curing," added Joe, looking at his sisters. "Brown sugar, salt, and saltpetre," said Charlotte. "Well rubbed in, and then swung up near the rafters there to mellow and ripen. That's the secret." "And your lungs full of fresh morning air, making you ready for it," said Anna, which was quite a long speech for her to make. After our morning crack we made our way to the barn. I love this old building. From it stone steps creep up to the granary, where the robins always find ingress, and the spiders drape the rafters with mighty webs. In one corner of the barn stands the turnip cutter. To hear the sharp knives slicing their way through the turnips is a most appetizing sound. The barn, still waiting for its loads of the new hay, had been cleared of all impediments. One end had a few hurdles placed across it. This made a pen for the rough sheep that had to be sheared. Outside, in the yard, the lambs bleated for the mothers who were waiting to be shorn of their locks. There were 3 clippers, Alan, Joe, and Bob, their man, who had been on the farm goodness knows how long. John, the farm pupil, stood ready to catch the ewes and take them to Alan or Joe, and another lad stood ready to wrap up the fleece and carry it away to the granary. As I watched John take hold of a full-grown sheep and dexterously fling it on its back, it looked such an easy operation that I thought I should like to have a try. The sheep stood watching me through the pen. What curious eyes they have! They look at you without any emotion showing in their liquid pale grey orbs. Only vacant fear lurks in them. I laid hold of a good hefty ewe and, by the swift way its legs moved, came to the conclusion that I had got hold of a centipede by mistake. My left arm went under its throat and my right stole over its back, even as I had watched the catcher do it. I then gave it a mighty heave, but though I lifted the sheep it came down on all fours, much to the delight of the shearers. I tried again, and as the ewe felt the strain, she merely sat on her haunches, and her hindquarters appeared to weigh about 3 tons. When the laughter had ceased, Alan called out, "Start again, and when you got hold on her, and you want to throw her on her back, press your right knee well under her shoulder. You forgot the knee trick." "A good hold on her back, and a good shove with the knee, gives her a bit of a spin, and over she comes," supplemented Joe. After such advice, I found no difficulty in putting my sheep on her back. "He'll make a farmer yet, I reckon," said Bob approvingly, so I felt I had acquitted myself fairly well. Now the clipper is holding the overturned ewe between his knees. The sharp shears first of all open out the breast, and then lay bare the neck until they reach the shoulder. How pinky white the newly exposed parts are! I rubbed my hand over them, and no longer wondered how the wool turns the rain, for my hand was lubricated with the finest oil cream. "That's the best lanolin," said Joe. "No better mackintosh in the world," added Alan. The shears have now left the shoulder, and are working on that under rotundity which is not mentioned in polite society. Then, after laying the beast on its right and left sides, the clippers finish their work over the backbone, and the much shrunken sheep stands once more upon its wooden-like legs, its head looking ridiculously large for the size of its body. One of the lads approached the much lightened animal, and before it left the barn stamped on its left side in tar a big letter P. "That's to let everyone know that a parson had a hand in fleecing the flock," said Joe with a grin. As I threatened him with bodily violence, he threw up his arms and cried, "Camarade!" and Alan explained, "Now that the sheep is so much slimmer, it can get through any small gap in the hedge, so we brands them well with our own name. They're apt to stray onto a neighbour's land, you know," he added. "What happens then?" I asked. "Have you to pay for their pasturage?" Alan shook his head. "Give and take is the motto of the farmers. We are grand neighbours." "The fellow came out to me yesterday," said Joe. "If you lost a couple of ewes, they're on my field. But you needn't worry. They have their teeth with 'em." And so the work goes on. Every 10 minutes a ewe is relieved of its wool, and about 100 sheep are disposed of in the course of a day. What an illustration of the sunny side of socialism! Watch the relationship between master and men on the farm which I call mine. Alan and Joe are the masters, and the workers are their servants, but all have their heart in their work, and there is the lubrication of personal liking for each other. "About 8 pounds of wool comes off each sheep," says Alan, as the boy picks up the fleece. "I heard it said," Joe says, as he tackles another ewe, "that a few years back it took 4 sheep to dress a woman in clothes for a year. But now?" "Why, I reckon it takes about 4 silkworms," Alan said with a laugh, and even the sheep appeared to enjoy the joke. "Those waiting lambs are kicking up a din," I remarked. "They are evidently getting tired of waiting for their mothers." "They'll get a shock too when they see 'em come out shingled," said Alan. "Some of 'em," Joe explained, "'ll have nowt to do with their mothers after we've finished with 'em. They look so strange to 'em that it makes 'em wean themselves. It knocks 'em all of a heap to see their dams come to us like middle-aged matrons and then skip out like 15-year-old lasses." As Raq and I went homeward, we heard on a neighbouring farm the rattle of the cutter as it laid low the grass. "Light crops there'll be this year, old man," I said to the dog, as I looked at the long lanes of the newly mown. Raq was lifting his nose to the gentle breeze that wafted over the fields. I too was drinking in the delicate flavours that it carried, but the dog was hoping to catch some scent of game. He knew nothing of the clover fragrance or the spicy aroma exuding from the juicy stems of the slain grasses. Then, as the cutter ceased for a moment, I heard the call of a cock partridge. For weeks that field had been the home of his mate and her little family. Now the sanctuary was laid bare, and the field looked strange and unfamiliar. "He's protesting against the shearing of his protecting green," I said to the dog. "Lucky for him and his family that the young corn still stands as a refuge." I stood still for a moment, imbibing the sweet scent of the new mown field. Then I turned to the dog and said, "Many a thing is taken from us in this world, and we call it a loss. Weaning may be a different term for it, the same thing looked at from a different angle." "I agree, master," wagged Raq's tail, but his nose said, "Let me go after that old partridge."